Good evening, everyone. Welcome to part one of the Inclusion Training Series, Instructional Supports to Facilitate Inclusion. So let's talk a little bit about SPAN. So for those of you who are not familiar with us, since 1987, families in New Jersey and beyond have made SPAN their first stop for support and resources. Today, SPAN's projects and programs for parents of children from birth to age 26 and for women of childbearing age have expanded from a kitchen table to over 20 national, regional, and local programs funded by the government agencies, state, federal, and local, by foundations and fee-for-service contracts. These programs cover education, health and mental health, human services, child care, and child welfare. Our mission is to empower and support families and inform and involve professionals interested in the healthy development and education of children and youth. Our foremost commitment is to children and families with the greatest need due to disability or special health, mental health needs, poverty, discrimination based on race, ethnicity, gender, language, immigrant or homeless status, involvement in the child welfare or juvenile justice systems, geographic location, or other special circumstances. This training series is presented to you by the START Engaging Parents of Students with Disabilities in Schools project. START EPSD Project is a partnership between the New Jersey Department of Education, Office of Special Education Programs, and SPAN Parent Advocacy Network. We offer programs and services that support the engagement of families to improve outcomes for students, including developing and sustaining special education parent advisory and support groups in communities and school districts. Through workshops, regional meetings, and parent leadership development activities, we help parents and parent leaders to become involved and active participants in their child's education, to partner with educators in improving educational programs for students with disabilities, particularly in the area of inclusion, to start and strengthen special education parent advisory groups or parent support groups, to increase effective family engagement, to improve special education programs, policy, and practices in communities. So I'd like to introduce the members of the START EPSD team that are here today. All of us serve as parent group specialists, and in addition, Tatiana and I are co-directing the project. To connect with us and the rest of our team, please visit our webpage at the link that's on the screen, and Tatiana will drop it into the chat box or the question box as well. Tatiana?
Thank you, Debbie. Good evening, everyone. This is Tatiana DeGrosse, and just like Debbie mentioned, I'm co-directing the START Engaging Parents of Students with Disabilities in Schools project. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Now, we would like to know a little bit about you. Please take a brief poll. Let me just launch a poll so we can find out. Okay, we can learn about your role in joining tonight's session. I'm attending this training series as, please select one, a parent or caregiver, instructional school staff, for example, teacher or instructional aide, a school administrator, other school staff, or community partner. Please take a few seconds to select the answer. Just a few more seconds, and I'm closing the poll. Here are the results. It looks like 75% of you on tonight's training are parents and caregivers. 17% of you are community stakeholders, and 8% instructional staff. Wonderful. Thank you so much. Next, we would like to, let me hide the poll. Next, we would like to find out what brought you here tonight. What questions or concerns motivated you to join this training that you are hoping to get answers to? Please take a minute to share with us your thoughts and hopes for this session by writing a sentence or two in the question box, or feel free to raise your hand and unmute yourself to speak. Okay, and I'm already seeing some some comments in the questions box. Maria, she says hi, and she would like to, she joined us because she would like to know what is an inclusion lesson supposed to look like in class support or resource class, ICR. Class, and she would like to get a brief overview. Sandy, oh, it's okay, Sandy. Sandy, she missed the poll, but she's a school-based physical therapist. Thank you for letting us know. And Michelle is hoping to expand her knowledge as a parent and a parent advocate. Carla, who is also on this training and is an educator, I know from Atlantic County. She would like to take back to her co-teachers in the inclusion class, as she likes to take the knowledge from this webinar or training back to her teachers. And Upma wants to know what is the 101, what is the what is the role of 101.8 during remote instruction, and what supports can I ask for my son with autism during virtual learning? That's from Carolyn. All wonderful, wonderful questions, and I'm hopeful that we will be able to touch on many of those during tonight's training. Thank you for your responses. Let's now take a look at our goals for this training. So tonight, during part one, we will discuss recent New Jersey and Federal Department of Education guidance memos with respect to inclusion during remote learning. We will identify strategies to help students participate during remote learning settings, and learn how to adapt IEP goals to facilitate inclusion in those remote settings. And finally, we'll learn how to advocate for more inclusive placements. Let us dive right in our presentation and learning together. Michelle?
Thanks so much, Tatiana, for sharing the goals for the webinar today. So we also want to make sure that we're all in the same mindset as we frame our discussion on the understanding of the DOE guidance on remote instruction. So if your child is in an inclusive placement during in-person learning, then they still should be in an inclusive placement during remote learning. Also, schools and districts must ensure that IEPs are followed to the extent possible. Each student with a disability can be provided the special education and related services identified in the student's IEP developed under IDEA or a plan that's developed under Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act. And the last point here, families and schools must communicate and work together to make sure services are provided. Now, COVID has not changed the students' rights to least restrictive environment, but the way the schools deliver the services are going to look different. District to district, county to county, it's just not going to always look the same. COVID has changed how general education systems operate. Changes require, though, the school system to determine how they will maintain LRE for each student in the context of how they're operating. So Tatiana is going to put a link in the chat box on this also. Stephanie's going to talk now a little bit about access to instruction.
Great. Thank you so much, Michelle. And good evening, everyone. Let's talk a little bit about access to instruction. Some students may require additional in-home services to access a free and appropriate public education. These services may include, but are not limited to, nursing for students who are medically fragile, and paraprofessionals for students who may have difficulty accessing the alternative options for learning being offered. As an example, virtual learning. Many districts contract these services out to private agencies. Some of these agencies may say that they are not contracted to go into students' homes, only into the school. If that's the case, the district must provide the services listed in the IEP, even if they must contract another agency to do so. You can refer to the New Jersey Administrative Code for more information, and Tatiana is going to be downloading the link into the chat box regarding this specific New Jersey administrative code. For some students, assistive technology may allow them to access instruction. In the road back, which is the plan from the New Jersey Department of Education for school districts, one of the things that they do talk about is assistive technology, and it's important to think about thinking about the number of students that assistive technology impacts. Students with learning disabilities and language barriers.
So when you think about assistive technology, you want to think about, has a needs assessment been done? You can conduct a needs assessment, determine the number of students that will require district provided services or internet access in order to access remote education. It's important to consider the technological needs of all students, including those with learning disabilities, assistive technology needs, and language barriers. And finally, some families of medically complex children may request that no aides or nurses come into their home during COVID. This is an IEP team decision which includes the parents. And I can't stress enough for everyone out there that family and school must work together to benefit the student. That's a theme that you'll probably hear repeated tonight because it's so, so important. So, FAPE, or free and appropriate public education, needs to be determined on an individual basis. While the delivery of services in a certain way might work for one student, it might not work for others. The parent and the district must work together. The team should come up with creative ways to educate the student. Here are some examples. American Sign Language. Interpreters or captioning provided for deaf and hard of hearing students. Teachers working from home can read out loud classroom material that's inaccessible for blind or vision impaired students. Online access can be given to the school library database. You can take advantage of group activities with peers and assign roles. Modification of curriculum to allow students to complete assignments and projects can be done. Projects at home can be made. One-to-one aid can assist in many of these suggestions. Oh, and also Bookshare is a free service to students that are visually impaired. So in speaking about one-to-one aids, we just wanted to let you view this brief video. That talks about how one-to-one aids can be utilized during remote instruction.
Hello, thank you for participating. Today's presentation is all about collaboration and supports between instructional assistants and students in the virtual classroom. Many teachers feel at a loss for how to effectively delegate adult support now that instruction has been moved online. To understand the components of this training, it helps to picture your online classroom as a virtual, three-dimensional space. Just like your physical classroom, the virtual classroom has presentation spaces, student workspaces, and separate rooms or areas for independent and small group work. Instructional assistants can facilitate groups and support students during whole group, small group, or independent work time. In your physical classroom, instructional assistants often support students during whole group instruction by adapting work in the moment or before the lesson, by checking for student understanding during the lesson, and by prompting students with academic socialization or responding to questions from the teacher. The same can be true in the virtual classroom. Through the use of collaborative documents like Google Docs, IAs can collaborate live with student assignments to provide feedback and adapt materials. Through an independent chat via Zoom, Google Docs, or some other platform, IAs can check for student understanding live during the lesson and provide prompting to help students make relevant comments or answer teacher questions. Instructional assistants in your physical classroom might help with organization and monitor projects and assignments to ensure that students with executive functioning challenges stay organized and complete their work. In your virtual classroom, you can share items with IAs through Google Drive to help monitor student progress on assignments and help them keep their work organized in easy-to-find folders. Even though students and teachers are working online, you can still break students into small groups and move from group to monitor and support. Your instructional assistant team members are essential in the success of differentiating through small groups. Using Zoom breakout sessions, you can select and assign specific students or adults to separate rooms to allow them to work in a less distracting and more individualized space. As the meeting host, you're able to bounce between these sessions to support as needed. Students and staff are able to send you questions or request help no matter which room you're in. You also have the ability to move participants to different rooms or call them back to the main session. Virtual learning is a monumental and challenging task that has been placed on teachers without warning. With a shift in perspective and the right tools, hopefully you can make this transition smooth and successful for you and your students.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you. Can you hear me now?
Yes, you're back. Yay.
I'm back. Sorry, my computer froze. But what I was saying before was the assistive technology. My son is in remote learning, and that picture was of my son. And he uses a communication device. He's nonverbal, so he has a communication device, the whiteboard, some handouts, a laptop. It really takes a lot of tools, but with those supports in place, he's successful in remote learning. So let's review. Schools and districts must ensure that IEPs are followed to the greatest extent possible. Families and schools must work together to facilitate a FAPE as it's outlined in the IEP. In-home services may be required for some students to access a FAPE. It's so important, and it's really all about the access, the support, and the communication. And now it's time for some questions. Tatiana?
Thank you, Stephanie.
And can I just add, I know it's a hazard of the work that we do, but when we talk about FAPE, we are talking about a free and appropriate public education for folks that might not know.
Yes, thank you. Sorry about that. A free, appropriate public education.
To our audience, you may choose to type in your questions in the question box, and I can read them out loud for our presenters to respond, or you can feel free to raise your hand and we will unmute you so you can ask your question live. I see no questions coming in at this time. We will have several other opportunities later on during the presentation for our question and answer.
I do see one hand raised. I did anyway. Oh, there it is.
Okay. Okay. Arlene, and we see your raised hand, and you need to unmute yourself. It appears that you're muted. While we wait for Arlene, Carolyn would like to know, what can I do if I feel my son's disability is keeping him from accessing learning virtually? That's a great question, Carolyn. I think the question many parents are asking themselves right now.
So I think that's going to have to be a question that you discuss with your child study team. What exactly is keeping him from accessing it? Is it his, for example, some children can't sit in front of a screen for, a long period of time. Some children, have auditory processing issues that makes, learning from a screen very difficult. So there are a lot of things that it could be. So what you want to do is have your child study team assess what it is, or have a discussion with them around what it is exactly that's keeping your son from accessing his education virtually. I don't know if that helps or if that addresses your problem, but that's the first thing I would do.
Carolyn wanted to clarify that her son has a sensory disorder and emotional dysregulation. So it's just like Debbie said, it is a conversation and a great conversation to have with your IEP, Individualized Education Program team. There is a section in the IEP where this can be absolutely appropriately to be discussed, how child's disability impacts learning, and with the new changes to current situation that he's in, virtual learning that could not have been probably anticipated when the IEP was developed. It is a good idea to go back to their table and have that really open and honest discussion to see what supports could be offered for him at this time. There is
I also wanted to add, can I just add to that too, that, you know, when we talk about supports, yes, we can talk about the material supports or electronic supports or things like that, but there also are the supports of staff within the district. So look at what are some of the staff that's in your district. Is there a behaviorist? Is there, you know, a BCBA that's in the district? Maybe, again, depending on the issue, guidance counselor. Leverage your resources that are within the district, and could there be someone that could also participate in the IEP meeting to perhaps also help with coming up with some strategies as well?
Exactly. School psychologist.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah,
Sometimes
exactly.
maybe even the building principal, if there are some, you know, some issues. It really depends on what it is, but look at the resources that are there.
Great.
So Arlene has a question. She's asking for her child who's who's in transition age from 16 to 21, and she's wondering if home services like job coach is something that can be requested. And okay, and she's also would like to add if she would appreciate either now or maybe later to find out how we can support the student to receive in-home services if district does not use COVID as a reason that it would not be able to be accommodated.
Well, that we're going to talk about later, right? We have an activity pertaining to
we're going to talk about that. And then Lauren, if you're still on and you want to jump in, please feel free.
Sure. I'm seeing that Arlene is still trying to unmute. Perhaps she could post her question, because it says self-muted, so I can't unmute her. Maybe she could post her question in the question box.
Okay.
She did. She just did. Mm-hmm. That's the question that I read out. Mm-hmm. So we have a couple other questions, so let me just ask them real quick before we move on. Maria is asking, how can a school differentiate between which students with IEPs go in and when? My son is in inclusion classroom, in-class support classroom, but has a shared aid. He's bright, but he isn't receiving his supports. Constant prompting and redirection necessary, I believe, on her part. So he's not getting any information. He's now he's in now, but going forward, she would like him to go with the first wave of kids to go back in, and if we have to go all in virtual again. That's another question that many parents have been asking, and one of the documents earlier was shared during the training. I dropped a link, and I can repeat the links for you, Maria, and others. There's a question and answer document that was just recently released by the U.S. Department of Education, as well as from their Office for Special Education Programs, as well as their Office for Civil Rights, answering this particular question. So you might want to take a look at their response. We have other questions. Here's from Maria. She would like to know, can I ask the child study team to be present and observe at his upcoming IEP reevaluation?
So what type of a reevaluation?
Mm-hmm.
So the child study team, depending on, you know, which evaluations they perform, they will be part of the ones that will be performing them. So they'll be there. Is that you're talking about his IEP team? His IEP reevaluation?
It appears to be that her child is now going through reevaluations, and okay. She was wondering if observation was possible. so if the observation in class observation is part of reevaluation, whether it is, whether it is your child is in person, attending school in person, or fully virtually, they could absolutely, join the virtual session to, to observe the child, whatever they're trying to observe, his behavior, his engagement. Absolutely. Absolutely.
I think, yeah, the important thing I think is to make sure that you specify that is one of the evaluations that you want to be a part of his reevaluation. I can't remember the name of it. I think it's an instructional or educational evaluation.
Oh, there are many, observations that are actually
right.
happening, during many different evaluations, like functional behavior evaluation or speech and language evaluation could be how the child is using the social skills, or in the classroom setting, it could be psychological evaluation as well. So absolutely, the short answer, Maria, you can absolutely request and they can do that, whether it is in person or virtually right now. Okay, we're going to move on, and like I said, we will have a couple of other opportunities for question and answer, so please type them in and we'll get back to them at the next opportunity. So we would like to adapt in the IEP. Again, we would like to make it very clear from the outset that COVID-19 pandemic has not changed the individual students' right to receive free appropriate public education, FAPE, in the least restrictive environment, LRE, under federal law called Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And we have been reiterating this throughout this webinar or training. In this, and the recent, like I said, in recent question and answer document that we shared with you earlier, U.S. Department of Education reminded state and local educational agencies that no matter what primary instructional delivery approach is chosen, they and individualized education program teams remain responsible for ensuring that a free appropriate public education is provided to all children with disabilities. COVID-19 has, on the other hand, changed the way how education system operates. Pre-COVID, most of us have never heard of such terms as distance learning or hybrid model. By now, we are remarkably familiar with these definitions and how they describe different options that education or schooling has been provided to our children. As a result, COVID-19 and health and safety concerns that come with it require school districts to make necessary changes and determine how to maintain each individual student's right to be educated in the least restrictive environment under the current circumstances. And let us look at an example to better understand how IEP services can be adapted to different operational models to ensure that least restrictive environment where inclusion is maintained. Please meet Susan. Susan is a little girl. She will be entering a third grade class with 26 other students in the start of 2020-21 school year, and she receives 30 minutes a day of special education services in the general education classroom in math and English language arts, and 30 minutes a week of speech and language therapy outside of the general education classroom under the disability classification of specific learning disability. So Susan's community has experienced an outbreak of COVID-19 in recent weeks, and her school district is considering multiple operational models for the start of this school year. Her IEP will be implemented, and FAPE, free appropriate public education, will be provided in each operational model. So let's, for example, let's look at the hybrid model, what her education program would look like. Susan's third grade class may be split in 2 sections. While in school, Susan may stay in one classroom all day with general education peers, and her teachers will rotate as appropriate. Her special education teacher can provide 60 minutes of support in math and language arts each day while Susan is in school. and then follow distance learning model on virtual days. And Susan may participate in the virtual or in-person speech session once a week. In distance learning format, Susan will participate virtually with her general education 3rd grade class, and her special education teacher will host a small group, a virtual breakout session with her and other students in ELA and math after large group instruction, or can provide support during large group instruction. And Susan will participate in the virtual weekly speech session. Okay, now I read you a similar scenario about another student, Eddie, and you try to come up with ideas about how his IEP can be implemented to maintain LRE, least restrictive environment in remote learning session. Okay, okay, so ready? Here's Eddie. Eddie will be entering a 10th grade at the start of this school year, and he receives 240 minutes a day or 4 classes of special education services outside of his general education classroom, and 60 minutes a week of speech and language therapy individually outside of general education classroom under disability classification of autism. And his 10th grade year, Eddie's scheduled to take English 2, business math, biology, civics, PE, health, journey to careers, animal science, study skills. His community also experienced an outbreak of COVID in recent weeks, and his school district is considering, again, multiple options to provide instruction. In your opinion, what are some considerations for LRE in distance learning and hybrid models do you think could be made for Eddie? And you can use, again, questions box to share your ideas and thoughts, or you can raise your hand and unmute yourself to speak. Okay, let's see. Okay. So who wants to give it a try? Using the limited information that we know about Eddie, there could be, a lot of variability in your answers, but we would like to see if you wanted to take a shot and figure out or share what LRE considerations or suggestions do you think could be implemented for Eddie in remote settings. We have lots of teachers here as well with us and advocates. Anybody wants to try?
I know that typing in can sometimes take a long time, especially if you're a slow typer like me.
Yes, that's correct. 60 minutes of speech sessions, since usually speech sessions usually are provided like in 30 minutes. So it could be potentially two speech and language sessions, and they could be provided during virtual hybrid model. They could be provided either virtually or in person, absolutely. And for his high school, another one from Maria for his high school interest classes, maybe Eddie would require less support and more support in classes that require that he may have some needs, additional needs. Very good. Arlene is suggesting, oh boy, breakout rooms for speech and language therapy with other peers for peer interaction and a proper role modeling. Could be, yes, great idea. If especially now during COVID pandemic, socialization is really key to maintain social skills, interaction with peers, especially for students like Eddie, who is on the autism spectrum. And Maria also recommends that choosing a variety of supports for the 4 classes that Eddie needs most support in, and attends as a special education student. Very good suggestions. Okay, wonderful. You got it. Hope this exercise helped you explore possible solutions for LRE for these two very different students. And we also included our possible solutions to the slide for your consideration and review. And we hope that this exercise showed you how to apply this similar reasoning to your individual situation with your own child, and then you will use it in communication or discussions with your child study teams as well. Next, we will pause for additional questions. Please type your questions in or unmute yourself to speak if you have additional questions. I really appreciate this active participation. I'm looking at the questions box, and thank you everyone for sending in your comments and sharing. Yes, absolutely. Let me drop that link to the question and answer documents that I mentioned earlier from the U.S. Department of Education. While I do that, next Debbie will introduce supports for all students. Debbie?
Thank you, Tatiana. So for most of the presentation, we focused on tips and supports specifically for students with special needs and chronic healthcare needs. But the reality is that all of our learners are quote unquote different learners, in that they all have specific strengths and challenges when it comes to learning and then expressing what they've learned. So we'd like to share some tips that are useful not only for students with special needs, but that parents and teachers should be aware of for all students. So these tips are: eliminate distractions to the extent possible, to chunk the assignments, to take frequent or provide frequent breaks, to adjust the length of time of a study session if needed, to change the schedule to accommodate, and to give specific feedback. Now, Michelle and Stephanie will discuss each one of these separately. I think, Michelle, you're up first.
Thanks so much, Debbie. All right, so the purpose of the information on this slide is to eliminate distractions as much as possible. We know that everyone does this to the best of their ability, but this is a new day and age as far as COVID, and things that we might not have seen, as a distraction, can be a distraction. So parents are now working at home too. So parents working at home should be aware that their phone conversations, their Zoom meetings, their email ping notifications, that can be distracting. Students should have a designated work area that's uncluttered and, as least distractions as possible. You want to begin the school day with all the supplies readily available so that there's not any interruptions once the classes begin. Also, if possible, to stagger your children's schedules if you have more than one child. And, of course, mute all phones and electronics. So now that we've talked about some ways to kind of set up your child's work area, Stephanie's going to talk about some strategies that your teacher might be able to use also. Stephanie?
Great, thanks, Michelle. Let's look at chunking information. What exactly is chunking information? Well, it's breaking the information down by topic or chunks. Some students learn better by learning information in steps, so more incremental rather than all at once. And then reviewing each section before moving on to the next one. So here's a really good example. So you can see it's kind of like a little bit of a paragraph there, but instead what it looks like when you chunk the information is you really break it down with little bullets, kind of concise, and really getting the point across. And it's, I guess, more visually appealing to someone who just wants to look at the key pieces of information. In our handouts that are in the in this webinar and that we have on in our handouts drop down, you'll see a PDF there called Content Chunking, and it's a really great resource that you can use. But I do want to reiterate that teachers should be doing this in accordance with your child's IEP. So again, that's all part of that communication with your child's team. Michelle?
Thanks, Stephanie. So, although our children would normally spend 5 or more hours a day at school, as parents, we don't really see how often they take breaks. And some children need more breaks than others. Now, a break can be a short walk, even inside the house, or, getting a snack, getting up and getting a drink, etc. So, if the student is in a virtual class, he or she could just stand up for a bit instead of sitting the entire time. I use my standing desk all the time. I'm standing right now. And I got this even before COVID. You can make your own standing desk by having some books or wood on top of a regular desk and just putting the laptop there. I know some parents who their kids are on, one of the balls that you get, the exercise balls. There's all sorts of ways to that same movement that is done in the classroom to kind of, just keep the child grounded a bit. Now, for my son, making sure that he asks for breaks appropriately before he acts out is key. I don't want him to try to escape doing work, so I build breaks into his day. So he gets a break before he needs a break, because once he needs it, it's too late, and that's when behaviors begin. Now, parents can also reinforce breaks by praising the child when they use their words or, request a break, however that they request it. Over time, students, may be able to tolerate longer times online with having less breaks. And again, this depends on if the learning is live learning or not. So Stephanie's going to talk about a tool that can be used to deal with scheduling breaks.
Thanks, Michelle. A great tool is a visual timer that students can use to work on projects for a set period of time. Students may have difficulty attending, for long periods of time, so they should be reinforced for the amount of time they work, even if it's just 5 minutes. As students progress, the time can be increased. Parents and teachers can discuss this as a way to facilitate an inclusive placement for a student who has difficulty attending to virtual instruction for lengthy periods of time. This is a great tool that I personally use with my son in remote learning. So it's the combination of, telling time, which is nice. So we use the timer with him. He has it in front of him, and he knows that, okay, when time is up, like I have to put in the work right now. I have to do an activity, even if it's something he may not be enjoying at the moment. But he knows that when he hears the little ding at the end, something he can take a break, he can go in his beanbag, or he can just relax, or even just like maybe have a quick snack or stretch or something. But then once the timer starts, we're back to work. So I have found it to be a really good strategy to use with my son in keeping him engaged in remote learning. So let's talk a little bit about scheduling next. Michelle?
All right, so Stephanie, that was a great share. And if you don't mind, I just want to kind of add something to that if your child can set the timer, I would suggest letting them do so. Timers are big in my house too. And, my son actually sets his on the computer. It gives them the responsibility to set that timer. And as a parent, I'm not the one saying come back from the break. The timer set it. So it makes things a lot smoother as far as that too. They actually, are part of the process. But as far as scheduling, some students may benefit from visual schedules, like color-coded schedules and checklists. And, once again, if the child can choose the colors and be involved in the process, that's a great thing, because then they have more buy-in as to what's happening. So if possible, also, though, have your child work on the most difficult subjects. So this way they'll be ready to tackle the easier subjects maybe by the end of the day, even if they are a little tired, if they begin with the most difficult subjects first. No, but however, you know your child best. And if your child is better in the afternoon, then schedule difficult topics rather than in the morning. So Tatiana is going to put in the chat a blog about remote learning schedules in the chat area. So that should be very helpful to that resource. So on the next slide, so when feedback is given, the goal is for the person to be able to use that feedback in order to improve themselves or improve the way in which they're accomplishing a task. So that means it needs to be effective feedback to students, and it needs to be for students, and it needs to be clear and specific. So feedback must be given in a way so that the student can understand. So verbally, if you're giving feedback and if the child has limited language, you would try to use the amount of words in a sentence that maybe that child speaks in a sentence. Or use gestures and maybe high fives or pointing to what the task is that you're giving feedback on. And also, you really need to be specific. Instead of using the usual "good job, that's great," it's more reinforcing to say, "I like the way you read that in your book. I like the way you lined up the items that you have there to count. Whatever it is, you want to be specific so that they know how they can repeat that same task. So check out the link also that's being posted in the chat about increasing opportunities to respond and give feedback to students in distance learning. And I just want to add also, don't feel shy about sharing any of these resources or anything else from this webinar with your child's teacher. This benefits anyone who's supporting your child. Okay, so then we have a little activity. So due to the changes in all of our lives because of COVID, families have shared responses that they've heard from districts. And this is a response that we've heard really far too often. So when recently issued federal guidance memo states that we're required to implement your child, this is from a school district. So when recently issued federal guidance memo states that we're required to implement your child's IEP, quote, to the greatest extent possible, unquote, during the COVID-19 crisis. Given that the crisis has led to the retirement of several of our special education teachers, we will no longer be able to provide your child with the 5 hours of specialized reading instruction per week as listed in the IEP, and we'll be forced to reduce the instruction to 2 hours per week. So if you heard this at a meeting or from the school district, would it be appropriate for them to reduce those hours of special education services because of staffing? I mean, if they don't have the staff, what can they do, right? Would that be appropriate? And if you guys can put your answer in the chat, I would appreciate it.
Mm-hmm. We have some people already chiming in saying no, absolutely not. That does not change child's needs. And a lot of no's, not acceptable. We have write a letter. Somebody's suggesting to write a letter asking how the district plans on meeting child's needs, as well as accommodations or modifications during the IEP meeting, if not, and do an addendum to the IEP, especially for students with learning disabilities and attention challenges. That's not limited to those challenges though. And a lot of, yes, all correct answers, no, because it is an individual plan made based on the child's needs, not on the needs of the school districts and their staff and needs. Another person says that under IDEA, free appropriate public education must be met and the appropriate part is not being followed. Another participant chimes in saying reading instruction can be delivered via e-learning and in person. So already making different suggestions, but the correct answer is no, I'm sure. We all know that. Michelle, back to you.
I did hear you share how a couple of people said they would respond writing a letter. Were there any other answers as far as how people would respond if the district told you this?
Okay, please type in your answer, so feel free to unmute yourself. How would you respond? What would your response be if this was your child?
Because I find a lot of times we know what the law is and we know how things should be, but sometimes it's a little bit more of a struggle to know what to do when it doesn't go the way it's supposed to go. Mm-hmm. So any feedback on that, on how they would respond?
Okay, their suggestion, put it in writing, how it will affect their child's free appropriate public education.
Okay.
Okay.
Go ahead.
And then another person wrote that I would say that if they were in the school, they would be provided. Therefore, COVID not IEP. The 5 hours should be provided under IDEA for this child to receive free appropriate public education.
Okay. The IEP process should be driven by the needs of the student. And as a parent, you can repeatedly redirect the discussion back to the student and the student's needs. At the IEP meeting, the team, including most of the professionals at this meeting, determined that the student was required 5 hours of specialized reading instruction per week. Given that the student has not made much progress, in fact, the student has probably regressed in this area since the closure of school, there's no justification for the reduction of these services. So at this point, they would typically refer back to the federal guidance memo. And they would say, well, they're doing their best to implement the IEP to the greatest extent possible. And this would lead to a discussion of exactly what is possible. Then she would ask them, are there any other special education teachers in the school building, in the district? The response usually is, of course there is. So given that the district has other special education teachers, it must be possible to provide the instruction as listed in the IEP by using another teacher from the district. And they deny the request, then we inform them that we have a list of reading specialists who are available to provide that reading service. It's real important to make sure that, we keep the focus on what the child needs. It's important not to validate their COVID-related problems. And again, redirect the conversation back to the student and the student's difficulties with virtual instruction. The multiple transactions created by this hybrid model. The behavior issues created by the COVID protocols that the student has to follow, and so on and so on. So I really appreciate everyone's feedback for that activity. Thanks so much. So Debbie's going to share another valuable resource. And I'm sorry, there's questions in between. So does anyone have any questions as far as the activity?
And while you're typing that in, thanks, Michelle, I can still speak about a few resources that we have for you. So one is this is a new resource. It's called Educating All Learners Online Library. And the link is on screen, and Tatiana is going to drop it into the questions box, or the chat. So this is a resource library that is great for teaching and learning strategies, assessments, and intervention-related services. The resources are organized by audience, such as grade level, subject, and disability. So I would encourage you, teachers and parents and caregivers, to check it out. So Tatiana, do we have any questions before we wrap up?
We have one question from Michelle, and she's asking that since COVID-19, she was told that meeting notices unneeded and had her IEP meeting without a notice. She also says that she did not get a whole IEP document, but received different sections and pieces, and she's wondering if it's okay. And then she received also parent participation form after the meeting, and she's wondering if those sort of things are appropriate.
So none of that's appropriate.
No, I just want to read in Michelle.
Because I'm sitting here, I'm reading each thing. It's like my mouth is hanging open a little bit.
I know, right?
Ahead, you can go first.
So I just wanted to say, and then Michelle, I just wanted to say, first and foremost, we have to remember that COVID-19 hasn't changed anything according to IDEA and the delivery of services. So whatever was appropriate before COVID-19 is still appropriate, especially in terms of delivering of special education services. So if that's something they would have,
but also Debbie, timelines, right?
Yes.
And all the notices that parents should be receiving in advance of the meeting. The same
exactly.
with notices, we know at least 10 days in advance, right?
Right. So all of that, that's what I'm saying. All of that's the same. Nothing has changed.
So what I would suggest also is to ask the district, since they're saying, well, now because of COVID, we don't have to give you a meeting notice. I would say, well, where in the code is that? I didn't see that when I looked at the
exactly. Code. I was going to say that. Ask to see everything in writing.
Everything, and that to me is the line that whenever there's something that I quite don't agree with, or think that they're not saying right, or even understand, that my first thing is to say, where is that in the code? Because if they can't
also, where is that in the New Jersey or the federal law?
Say
and the questions and answers, the guidance.
Right. Yeah, so the short answer is no, that's not appropriate.
Okay, we have another question that just came in. This parent was told that if she chooses a remote learning option for her child, one-on-one support will not be provided because the role of the aide is only behavior management. And she's asking if that statement is correct. Is that correct?
No, it's not correct. No, it's not correct. I mean, I think we've, and we've provided, cite the code and the resources that we've provided tonight. what should be happening is having a meeting to discuss what the supports look like in virtual learning, as opposed to being in the building. So and we talk about the reason for the supports. So what would the district even propose in lieu? Let's just hypothetically say, in lieu of the support, this related service that is outlined in your child's IEP, what would they be providing in replacement of it? I'm always curious to know that as well. But first and foremost, that is, look at the code and all the information that we've shared and the resources. Your child should still be receiving what is outlined. And I think there was a comment that that I think Michelle might have said before. The IEP team decided at some point prior to COVID that your child needed that support. Why would it change now? And that thought really has stuck with me. So I just wanted to be, just also get that point across as well.
I also want to remind folks that in part 2, we're going to specifically discuss related services and behavioral supports.
Yes. Tatiana, any more questions?
Lots of comments, and thanks for this wonderful, valuable session. It was very helpful. Thank you all for joining us. That's been great because of this interactive participation, and we do hope that you will come back next Tuesday evening. I dropped the link. If you haven't registered yet, I will drop the link to register for the part 2 of this session again in the chat box, and Debbie will wrap us up tonight.
Thank you. So I just wanted to mention, first of all, I wanted to acknowledge Lauren Agaradas, who works with SPAN and who helped us put this together. And also I wanted to let folks know that if you did not get your questions answered and you have more questions, or if you want more clarification, that you can always call the SPAN warm line and speak to an intake specialist who will connect you with a family resource specialist or someone who can answer your specific questions. That's all I have for this evening. Like I said, thank you very much for joining us, and hope to see you next week.